In 2025, global attention has turned to the evolving dynamics of U.S.-Africa relations, particularly in the context of Donald Trump's second term as U.S. President and the rise of Captain Ibrahim Traoré as a prominent figure in African politics. Traoré, Burkina Faso's 37-year-old military leader, has emerged as a symbol of Pan-Africanism and resistance against perceived Western imperialism, often compared to Burkina Faso's revolutionary icon Thomas Sankara. His leadership, marked by bold moves like expelling French troops and rejecting Western financial institutions, has resonated with many Africans disillusioned by decades of foreign influence. On the other hand, Trump's "America First" agenda, characterized by protectionist trade policies and a transactional approach to foreign relations, has raised concerns about its impact on African nations, particularly those seeking economic sovereignty. The alleged X clash refers to a supposed exchange where Traoré responded to Trump's 2025 Africa trade policies, branding them neo-colonial. This narrative, amplified on social media, has sparked debates about whether Traoré is the new voice of African resistance or a polarizing figure whose policies invite external backlash. However, a critical examination reveals that many claims about direct confrontations between Traoré and Trump, particularly those circulating on X, are either exaggerated or outright fabricated, often fueled by AI-generated content and viral misinformation. This analysis will unpack the context, explore the policies at play, and assess the broader implications for U.S.-Africa relations, while addressing the authenticity of the clash narrative. Ibrahim Traoré. Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader background and rise to power. Ibrahim Traoré, born in 1988, is Africa's youngest head of state, having seized power in Burkina Faso through a military coup in September 2022. The coup ousted interim President Paul-Henri Damiba, whom Traoré accused of failing to address the country's escalating jihadist insurgency. Traoré, a captain in the Burkinabe army with experience fighting insurgents and serving in UN peacekeeping missions, positioned himself as a leader committed to restoring national sovereignty and economic self-reliance. His policies and rhetoric draw heavily on the legacy of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary president from 1983 to 1987, who championed anti-imperialism and self-sufficiency before his assassination in a French-backed coup. Traoré's leadership has been marked by decisive actions. Expulsion of French forces. In 2023, Traoré ordered French troops and diplomats to leave Burkina Faso, ending a decades-long military partnership. This move was celebrated across Francophone Africa as a rejection of neo-colonial influence. Nationalization of resources. Traoré has pushed to nationalize Burkina Faso's gold mining sector, a critical resource, to reduce foreign control and redirect revenues to domestic development. Pivot to Russia and China. Aligning with Russia and forming the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, with Mali and Niger, Traoré has sought alternative partnerships to counter Western dominance. Economic reforms. His government has rejected IMF and World Bank loans, raised civil servant wages, and invested in agriculture and infrastructure. Though challenges like inflation and ongoing violence persist, these policies have made Traoré a polarizing figure. To supporters, he is a champion of African dignity, challenging the exploitative structures of neo-colonialism. Critics, however, argue that his authoritarian governance and failure to quell jihadist violence, over 60% of Burkina Faso remains outside state control, undermine his revolutionary image. His cult of personality, amplified by social media and AI-generated content, has further fueled both admiration and skepticism. Traoré's anti-Western stance. Traoré's rhetoric is deeply rooted in Pan-Africanism and anti-imperialism. He has publicly condemned Western powers, particularly France and the United States, for perpetuating economic dependency through mechanisms like the CFA franc and exploitative trade agreements. His speeches often highlight the paradox of Africa's resource wealth coexisting with widespread poverty, blaming historical and ongoing Western exploitation. This stance has resonated with a younger generation of Africans and the diaspora, who see Traoré as a modern-day Sankara, unafraid to challenge global powers. In 2025, Traoré's criticism of Western policies intensified, particularly in response to perceived U.S. interference. For instance, when U.S. AFRICOM Commander General Michael Langley accused Traoré of misusing Burkina Faso's gold reserves for personal security during a Senate hearing in April 2025, Traoré's supporters, including South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, denounced the remarks as neo-colonial. The backlash highlighted Traoré's role as a lightning rod for anti-Western sentiment, with social media amplifying his defiance. Donald Trump's 2025 Africa policy, a transactional approach. Trump's America First doctrine. Donald Trump's second term, beginning in January 2025, has seen a continuation of his America First agenda, emphasizing protectionism, bilateral trade deals, and a reduced U.S. global footprint. His approach to Africa, as outlined in sources like Foreign Affairs and Size, is transactional, prioritizing U.S. economic and geopolitical interests over traditional diplomacy or soft power initiatives. Key elements include trade and tariffs. Trump has threatened broad tariffs on imports, including from African countries, to protect U.S. industries. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, set to expire in September 2025, faces uncertainty, with debates over its reauthorization highlighting tensions with countries like South Africa. Geopolitical competition. Trump's Africa policy focuses on countering China and Russia's growing influence. His administration views Africa's critical minerals and consumer markets as strategic assets but struggles to compete with China's infrastructure investments and Russia's military partnerships. Reduced aid and engagement. Proposals to cut funding for USAID and other agencies suggest a diminished U.S. presence in Africa, potentially ceding ground to rivals. Programs like PEPFAR and the Development Finance Corporation, DFC, face funding uncertainties. Alleged neo-colonial policies. The claim that Traoré labeled Trump's policies neo-colonial likely stems from broader criticisms of U.S. economic strategies in Africa. AGOA, while beneficial for providing duty-free access to the U.S. market, has been criticized for its conditionalities, which some African leaders view as tools to enforce Western priorities. Trump's tariff threats, particularly against BRICS nations like South Africa, have further fueled perceptions of economic coercion. His administration's decision to cut aid to South Africa in February 2025, citing human rights violations over land reform policies, was seen by critics as an attempt to punish nations asserting economic independence. Moreover, Trump's reported rhetoric during his first term, allegedly referring to African nations in derogatory terms, has not been forgotten. While no direct evidence confirms Trump mentioning Traoré specifically in 2025, fabricated videos and posts on X have exaggerated tensions, portraying Trump as attacking African leaders and Traoré as responding defiantly. These narratives, often AI-generated, tap into real frustrations with U.S. policies but lack factual grounding. The alleged X clash. Fact versus fiction. Investigating the claim. The narrative of a 2025 X clash between Traoré and Trump appears to be largely a product of social media amplification and misinformation. Several sources, including Africa Check and Boatos.org, have debunked claims of direct confrontations. A viral video from May 2025 falsely claimed Trump said Africa's mineral resources belong to the U.S., with Traoré's name invoked in the caption. AFP fact-check confirmed the video was AI-generated, with audio not matching Trump's lip movements. The original clip, from September 2024, showed Trump encouraging voters, not discussing Africa. Another claim alleged Trump humiliated Traoré on live TV, with Traoré responding forcefully. Boatos.org found no evidence of such an event, noting that Traoré's image is often exploited in AI-generated content to promote anti-Western narratives. A post by the Facebook page United Africa claimed Traoré declined an invitation to Trump's inauguration, prioritizing domestic issues. Dubois debunked this, confirming no African leaders were invited, and no reputable source reported such an invitation. These examples highlight a pattern. Traoré's popularity as a Pan-Africanist icon makes him a frequent subject of viral, often fabricated, content. The clash narrative likely draws from real tensions, such as U.S. criticisms of Traoré's gold reserve policies, but no verified evidence supports a direct exchange between the two leaders on X or elsewhere. X reactions and social media dynamics. Despite the lack of a factual clash, X has been a hotbed for discussions about Traoré, Trump, and U.S.-Africa relations. Posts reflect polarized sentiments. Pro-Traoré sentiment. Users like Abiwuni78 and Uskabra have praised Traoré as a defender of African sovereignty, criticizing U.S. figures like General Langley for neo-colonial attitudes. These posts often frame Traoré as a revolutionary hero, with hashtags like #HandsOffAES gaining traction. Anti-Western narratives. Content on X frequently accuses the U.S. of hypocrisy for criticizing African leaders while ignoring Western resource exploitation. A post by Alien Mukundwa on June 24, 2025, linked Traoré's stance to broader African resistance against Trump's policies, though it provided no direct evidence of a clash. Misinformation and AI content. Many X posts amplify fabricated videos or quotes, portraying Traoré as directly challenging Trump. These often garner thousands of shares, fueled by algorithms and ideological echo chambers, but lack credible sourcing. The X discourse reflects genuine frustration with Western policies but is muddied by misinformation. Traoré's supporters use the platform to amplify his anti-imperialist message, while critics highlight his authoritarian tendencies and security failures. The absence of a verified clash suggests that the narrative is more symbolic than substantive, reflecting broader ideological battles over Africa's future. The broader context, U.S.-Africa policy and neocolonialism. Historical context of neocolonialism. The term neocolonialism, popularized by Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, describes how Western powers maintain influence over former colonies through economic, political, and military means. In Africa, this manifests in economic dependency. The CFA franc, tied to the French treasury, limits monetary sovereignty in francophone countries like Burkina Faso. Traoré's push to abandon it aligns with broader calls for economic independence. Resource exploitation. Africa's vast mineral wealth, gold, cobalt, lithium, has historically enriched foreign corporations while leaving local populations impoverished. Traoré's nationalization efforts aim to reverse this military presence. Western military bases, like France's Operation Sabre in Burkina Faso, have been criticized as tools to protect foreign interests rather than local security. Traoré's accusation of neo-colonial U.S. policies, while unverified in direct reference to Trump, resonates with these historical grievances. His expulsion of French troops in alignment with Russia reflect a rejection of Western dominance, mirroring sentiments across the Sahel. Trump's policy impact on Africa. Trump's 2025 Africa policy, as analyzed by Brookings and Size, could have significant implications. AGOA reauthorization. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, which grants duty-free access to the U.S. market, is critical for African exporters. Its potential expiration or restrictive reauthorization could harm economies like South Africa's, especially if Trump imposes tariffs. Aid cuts. Trump's proposed reductions in USAID and State Department funding could weaken U.S. soft power, leaving a vacuum for China and Russia. Programs like PEPFAR, which supports 25 million Africans with HIV/AIDS treatment, face uncertainty. Geopolitical shifts. Trump's transactional approach may prioritize deals with compliant regimes, potentially supporting France's efforts to maintain influence in the Sahel. This could exacerbate tensions with leaders like Traoré, who reject Western alignment. Critics argue that Trump's policies risk reinforcing perceptions of neocolonialism by prioritizing U.S. interests over African agency. For instance, his administration's focus on countering China may lead to coercive measures, like sanctions, that alienate African nations seeking equitable partnerships. African reactions across Africa. Reactions to U.S. policies and Traoré's stance vary. Support for Traoré. In Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, Traoré's anti-Western rhetoric has galvanized youth and Pan-Africanist movements. Rallies in Ghana and Liberia under the Hands Off AES banner reflect regional solidarity. Criticism of U.S. interference. South Africa's EFF and other groups have condemned U.S. criticisms, like Langley's gold reserve allegations, as attempts to undermine African sovereignty. Concerns over stability. Some analysts, like those at the Council on Foreign Relations, view Traoré's authoritarianism and security failures as destabilizing, arguing that his policies risk isolating Burkina Faso economically. These reactions highlight a continent at a crossroads, with leaders like Traoré challenging the status quo while navigating internal and external pressures. Traoré as the new voice of Africa. The case for Traoré's appeal as a potential new voice of Africa stems from several factors. Youth and charisma. At 37, Traoré connects with Africa's young population, who make up over 60% of the continent's demographic. His fiery speeches and social media presence amplify his message. Anti-imperialist stance. By expelling French forces and rejecting Western financial institutions, Traoré embodies resistance to neocolonialism, resonating with those frustrated by foreign dominance. Economic reforms. His focus on nationalizing resources and investing in agriculture and infrastructure aligns with calls for economic self-reliance, earning praise from Pan-Africanists. Analysts like Beverly Oching note that Traoré's message reflects a broader questioning of why Africa remains poor despite its resources. His alignment with Russia and China, while controversial, is seen as a pragmatic move to secure alternative partnerships. The case against critics argue that Traoré's leadership falls short of revolutionary ideals. Security failures. The ongoing jihadist insurgency, controlling over 60% of Burkina Faso, undermines Traoré's promise of stability. Allegations of abuses by security forces further tarnish his image. Authoritarianism. Traoré's delay in returning to civilian rule and cult of personality raise concerns about democratic backsliding. The Council on Foreign Relations calls him a tyrant whose policies highlight Africa's governance challenges. Economic risks. Rejecting IMF and World Bank support, while symbolically powerful, limits Burkina Faso's access to global markets, potentially exacerbating poverty and inflation. Social media's role. Traoré's image as a revolutionary is heavily amplified by social media, particularly X, where AI-generated content and viral posts portray him as a heroic figure. While this boosts his global profile, it also fuels misinformation, as seen in debunked claims about clashes with Trump. His supporters argue that this digital presence reflects genuine grassroots enthusiasm, but critics warn it creates a distorted narrative that overshadows his governance challenges. Conclusion. A symbolic clash, not a literal one. The Ibrahim Traoré versus Donald Trump clash of 2025 is more a product of social media myth-making than a verified event. While Traoré's anti-Western rhetoric and Trump's transactional policies set the stage for ideological tensions, no credible evidence supports a direct confrontation on X or elsewhere. Instead, the narrative reflects broader frustrations with U.S.-Africa relations, amplified by viral misinformation and Traoré's growing cult of personality. Traoré's leadership, while inspiring to many, faces significant hurdles: security crises, economic challenges, and accusations of authoritarianism. Trump's policies, meanwhile, risk alienating African nations by prioritizing U.S. interests over equitable partnerships. The debate over whether Traoré is the new voice of Africa underscores a continent grappling with its past and future, seeking leaders who can balance sovereignty with stability. As Africa navigates its geopolitical reorientation, the U.S. must move beyond neo-colonial perceptions to engage as a true partner. For Traoré, the challenge is to translate revolutionary rhetoric into tangible progress. The clash may be fictional, but the issues it raises, economic sovereignty, foreign influence, and African agency, are very real and will shape the continent's trajectory in 2025 and beyond.